Welcome to Venezuela Insider, the only place in Venezuela for expats, digital nomads, entrepreneurs, investors, travelers, and related internationals. For more information, venezuelainsider.com. Today, we are taking a travel to the past and talking about when Venezuela was rich. Venezuela, most of you have heard about Venezuela, all this political and economic situation that we had, and the migrants and hyperinflation and you name it. That's all the bad news. Venezuela has been a machine of bad news for the international news media on the past 10 years or so. However, we already spoke. The situation is, let's say, slightly improving, and to say the least. And today we are not concentrating on that. We are going to concentrate on the time when Venezuela was rich. So let's start. So let's start by the fact that why Venezuela is rich. Well, let's start is natural resources, especially oil. Venezuela has the largest proven reserve of crude oil on earth, even surpassing Saudi Arabia, that is, the goat of the oil industry at the moment. And actually, the OPEC, the main international oil cartel, was founded by the two oil goats back then, that was Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, with a couple of other nations. We already discussed that. But also, Venezuela is rich in many other ways. On natural resources, we have iron ore, gold, diamonds, natural gas. So the natural resources wealth is just preposterous. It's just huge. And also you have to consider that Venezuela has a strategic location on the, on the Americas. It's at the North or South America. So just a 3-hour flight to Miami, and also is just a quick, let's say, transatlantic flight to Western Europe and such. So Venezuela is always been a rich place, even for Latin American standards. Venezuela has always been, in many times in history, the richest place in Latin America. During the 20th century, by many times, Venezuela was top 10 or top 20 regarding GDP per capita. Also, since the 50s, Venezuela had this international connection all over the world, all over the place. Caracas was a vibrant city. It had a resemblance with an European capital. Many migrants used to come to Venezuela. They used to, from places like every place in Latin America, Colombians, we had a bunch of Colombian population, but also we had Europeans. I'm talking Jewish descendants, talking Germans, I'm talking also Polish people, people from the old Soviet bloc, and also people from the Mediterranean like Spain. We had a bunch of Spaniards here, Italians, Portuguese, you name it. People from all over the place, and also I have to include people from the Middle East and China. So Venezuela was a beacon of hope during the 20th century for the rest of the world. Also, you had this, it was really very, had a great economy. The middle class was huge back then. The unemployment was just under 4%. Also, people, the middle class, they were able to afford to travel to Miami every weekend. Every time a Venezuelan tourist reach other place, they say, "Oh, this is just so cheap. Give me two." That actually they had this surname, this nickname of, "Oh, Venezuelans dame dos," or "Give me two," because Venezuelans reach every store and say, "Hey, just give me two." And actually, Venezuela was the biggest consumer per capita of Scotch whiskey, and we still consume a lot of whiskey here in Venezuela, even with the crisis. I think with Venezuelan and Scotch whiskey. So Venezuela was a rich place. Actually, we until just about a decade ago, 15 years or so, Venezuelans were not migrants like other people, other nationalities in Latin America, like Mexicans, like Colombians, like even Argentinians and Chileans and Peruvians and you name it, because we had got pretty much everything taken care of here in Venezuela, and of course we know the history with the Chavismo, although the history with the Chavismo, that the Chavismo just destroyed the nation and basically they did so. However, they were just the last nail on the coffin, and we're going to talk what happened before the Chavismo that set the path of destruction here in Venezuela. So what we had on, let's say, the 50s, we had this very good economic situation. Venezuela was actually one of the top 10, top 5 richest countries on the world on GDP per capita basis. But at the same time, we had a dictatorship back then. It was a right-wing dictatorship. The dictator's name was Marcos Pérez Jiménez. And actually, many people love him even today. Although what happened is, he's a dictator, so he's a, what, an a-hole. And the other thing is that also he was corrupt. But the economic situation back then was pretty good, according to some history books. And after that, we had democracy by the late 50s. And during the late 50s and let's say the start of the 70s, Venezuela, one of the richest places on the world, but also we had democracy. And back then, the rest of Latin America was poor and also on many dictatorship situations. And on the peak, on the early 70s, we also had on the world, we had the Yom Kippur War, and the Arab nations made this embargo of crude oil to the United States and Western nations and created this international energy crisis, oil crisis. You saw these long gas lines on the United States and many Western nations. But Venezuela actually got the longer end of the stick because they were able to export crude oil, and at the moment the price of the oil barrel just spiked up and Venezuela became even richer back then, and also a trustworthy ally and business partner of Western nations. Now, on the mid 70s, we had this president called Carlos Andrés Pérez. He's basically the avatar of the Fourth Republic, which is the 40 years that we had before the Chavismo. And the guy was, I have to say, it was a very charismatic man, but he was a populist. He wasn't a communist. He was like a social democrat, something like that. And what he did on the mid 70s was nationalizing the oil industry. Also, PDVSA became huge back then, and the government started controlling the oil revenue to the country. And of course, when this happens, a lot of corruption because the government starts increasing heavily the public spending. Also, this creates a situation for corruption, for bribes, for kickbacks and such. So back then the Venezuelan economy after the 70s became a chronic capitalism system, and also they imposed taxes, tariffs, and such in order to make the imports more expensive in order to protect the national industry, and this always ends up badly. And throughout the 70s at the early 80s, the situation was still good but started trending down. We had on 1983 the situation called Black Friday, when the Venezuelan currency, the Bolivar, just depreciated quite heavily. That created a lot of social turmoil and decline. the standard of living for the average Venezuelan back then. And by 1989, we have this huge situation that is historically called El Caracazo. In this situation, let's say the poorer people from Caracas just started ravaging and storming the rest of the capital, and the Venezuelan army started shooting against these people, and some people got killed. It was a very horrific situation happened back then. They were protesting because the standard of living had decreased heavily on those years. So by the 90s, we had this situation, but Venezuela was still a cool country, but with a lot of social issues and also economic issues as well. And that led to the opportunity for Hugo Chavez to win the election on 98 and the rest of history. So we had this situation and Venezuela was rich back then and such, and of course, all these things, when not everything goes well all the time. And sadly, that led to the situation that we have right now that is not great, is not as great as it was on the 70s and the 80s. However, it's not as bad as we had on 2017, believe me. The country was way, 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 way worse back then. And we have the situation where maybe Venezuela can take off again. I'm hoping for that. And I'm sure Venezuela is gonna grow. I'm very bullish on Venezuela in the next 10 years. And if you are as well, you can do your own due diligence if you want to join me on this particular statement. And Venezuela is going to take off eventually. Venezuela has never been this poor, just evicted country from the rest of the world. Venezuela has always had a pretty decent standard of living for Latin American standards and many times for international standards as well, even greater than Western nations. So that's up to you. What is going to happen? I'll read it on your comments below. Thank you for watching Venezuela Insider. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on social media. If you want to work with us, VenezuelaInsider.com. Thanks again and have a nice day.